Okay, here we are. Positivity bias. We're on chapter 27. Chapter 27. And so many times when we're talking about the positivity, it really requires us to get a much bigger picture. We typically, it's the minutia that drive us nuts. But when we see a much bigger picture of things, we manage it much better. And so again, the Rebbe is now extending this positivity bias to understand that between this world and the next world is just a thin veil. And death is not the end. Death is the end of one stage and the antechamber into the next.
Oh,
Right?
that's
So,
if you have faith.
right.
I mean, there's no proof as we can sense it.
Right. So now we're back to the 3-year-old throwing his temper tantrum.
I wish I was a firm believer, but I
You
have
know,
doubts.
I get
guess.
it. And it's true is that and I've said this before so many times. My father, God bless him, should rest. He should the Gan Eden, but he was a chemical engineer, very analytical mind, and he said I wish I could believe. He said you are so lucky to have that strong faith. So he would bless me time and again. For
And
the
there's
strong
nothing
faith,
new
but
under the sun. We just closed out Genesis, and we dealt with Israel's death and Joseph's death at the end.
yeah.
I mean,
I
it's
guess
this is as old a story as our people.
I guess we'll just have
Yeah.
to wait and see, don't we?
That's it. That's right. So the stories here, again, is the idea of being able to see beyond the shallow perspective and see a much deeper perspective. 1960, a group of college students came to see the Rebbe. And of course, they were looking to understand the concept of death. The Rebbe explained the term used to describe death in Judaism is histalkus. Histalkus. We don't say that someone died. America, you say someone passed on, right? Histalkus is more like passing on. Is that idea of moving on to the next level, going up to the next level, right? So when one completes one's mission here in life, then they go on to the higher plane. And that's the other part. It's important to know is that when it's time, it's time. When it's not time, it's not time. Nothing changes that, right? So when a person has finished their responsibilities, what their neshama, their soul came to do, then they pass on. Now, there's some exceptions to that rule and some challenges to that rule we can talk about a little bit later. But death is not the cessation of life. The world actually describes the process. The words actually describe the process whereby one's spiritual life takes on a whole new dimension. The notion is consistent with scientific principles of conservation of matter, which states that nothing physically can be annihilated. A table or a piece of iron can just be cut up and burned. In no instance can the matter of the table or the iron be destroyed. It just takes on a different form. Likewise, on the spiritual level, our spiritual being, the soul, can never be destroyed. It only changes its form and is elevated to a different place. Elevated. So again, it's the idea of coming to understand that 120 years is the norm blessing for we bless each other 120 years of good health. You do remember the story about the guy who the rabbi told him happy birthday and to live to 120, happy birthday, live 120. The guy turned 120. The rabbi came and he said, "Happy birthday."
Have a nice day.
A nice day. That's it, right? So the neshama, the godly soul, can never be destroyed. So it had its job down here in a physical body, and it was restrained to the physical body. That was not comfortable for the godly soul, which has an infinite aspect to it, to be constrained inside the body and be subject to the defilement of the body. The godly soul only wants godly things. So this is not easy, this time down here in this world. And Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers, says, against your will you're born, and against your will you die. Meaning that the neshama doesn't want to come down, doesn't want to come into these restrictions, doesn't want to come down and deal with the problems of this life. But when it is forced down into the body, and it comes into the body and runs a life, it realizes, hey, here is the place to actually do Torah and mitzvahs. You can't do that in the other realm. Here's where all the action is. So he doesn't want to die now, because here's where all the action is. So again, against our will you're born, and against your will you pass away. So this idea then of death is passing away from this world, but the journey is just beginning in the next realm. And so it's not this permanent thing that people tend to think about. 1978, a family in Milan, Italy, they wrote to the Rebbe about a death in the family, a tragic death in the family. And the Rebbe expressed, he wrote back to them, the only thing that an illness or fatal accident can do is to cause a weakening or a termination of the bond that holds the body and soul together. Whereupon the soul departs from its temporary abode in this world and returns to its original world of pure spirit in the eternal world. Needless to say, insofar as the soul is concerned, death is actually a release from its imprisonment in this body. While the soul is bound up with the body, it suffers from the physical limitations of the body, which necessarily constrains the soul and involves it in physical actions that are essentially alien to the spiritual world. The departure of the soul from the body is actually a great advantage and ascent for the soul. So for the soul, it's a great thing. It's a very wonderful thing. It's a good thing. Henceforth, after death, the soul is free to enjoy the spiritual bliss of being near to God in the fullest measure. So, again, when we look at the concept of death and dying, it can have that sensation of finality and loss and sorrow, but that's just on us, on our side. That's not on the neshama's side. The neshama has a transition period to go to that can be stressful. We can help with that, but it's released from this imprisonment. And there's always this connection, right? The Rebbe insisted that there remains an ongoing spiritual connection between the living and the deceased, and that relationship even has a tangible aspect to it. In a letter written to a war widow, the Rebbe writes, the ties between two people, and certainly those between a husband and wife, or a parent and child, are chiefly relationships of the spirit. A grenade or a disease can affect the body, but it cannot affect the spirit of the soul. The physical bond between two persons can be broken, but not the spiritual relationship.
Mhm.
So there's this eternal bond between that continues. It continues no matter. The Reb Nachum Rabinowitz in Yerushalayim, who lost his son, and he related to the Rebbe that at that point, I felt that my life was no longer had any purpose. I saw no value in my wealth and my status. I went to see the Rebbe in search of consolation and advice. The Rebbe asked me what my feelings would be if my son went overseas and he was living in a foreign country from which he could not communicate. But if I could be assured that all his needs were being met and that he was not suffering at all, although the separation will be difficult, would you be happy for your son? And he said, yes. And the Rebbe said, and although he could not respond, but if you could communicate to him, if you could send him packages, would you do so? Of course, said the father, absolutely. So the Rebbe said, this is the situation. Every prayer you recite, you are sending a message to your son. Every gift that you make to tzedakah or institutions that you fund, you are sending a package to him. He cannot respond, but he appreciates your words and your gifts. In other words, in the world to come, we can't do mitzvahs anymore. That's physically this world. To light a Shabbos candle, to put on tefillin, to put up a mezuzah, to kiss the mezuzah. These are things like learning Torah we can do here. The neshama can't do that up there. So how does the neshama progress in the next world? In the next world, the neshama is dependent on the family left behind and the students left behind who do things in their merit, and that's how the neshama is then elevated. Which is why, for example, that a son will say Kaddish, a son or a daughter will say Kaddish for 11 months after a person passes. What is Kaddish? Kaddish is not a mourner's prayer. Kaddish is a prayer that sanctifies God's name even in the midst of our sorrow. And so with that beautiful sentiment that we're praising God even in the midst of our pain and sorrow, so that shows our commitment to God. And those kindnesses then elevate the neshama that's attached to us. Every time we give tzedakah in someone's merit, their neshama is elevated. Every time we do an act of goodness or kindness, and we think of them in doing it, or we say, this is what my teacher taught me to do, and we're crediting them, their neshama has an elevation. So that's how we can send presents to those who are in the next world, through our learning of Torah and our doing of mitzvahs, and specifically those things that we do in their schus and their honor. You'll remember the newsletter, the holiday magazines that have been coming out have a reference to Miriam Bas Avram. And again, the family is giving donations to the Institute. But this is someone that I had, my earliest Jewish experiences were with Miriam and her inviting me in college to come and have meals and to come and do mitzvahs and things. So every time we think of her, then her neshama has an aliyah in the world to come, including what we just said now, that the kindnesses that we do, we mention her name, this causes an aliyah for the neshama right here in the moment. So he says here, through performing good deeds in your mother's merit, someone else's mother had passed away, especially those inspired by your mother's influence, you and your siblings were not only reaching out to your mother in the next world or sending her packages, so to speak, they were actually enabling her to have a continued presence and impact in the physical world. In other words, because she taught these things, and we do these things, then her impact continues. Bond between the living and the soul that has ascended endures, for the soul is enduring and eternal. And in fact, it's no longer constricted, right? Can actually do more than it could before. Good deeds that we do cause their spirit to receive pleasure and to rise higher and higher in the spiritual realms. So the education we provide for the young is our schus, our merit in the years to come when they do their mitzvahs. So the neshama in the next world depends on relatives and friends to do mitzvahs and good deeds on their behalf, and that elevates them higher and higher. The other piece here that the chapter talks about, which we've seen numerous times before, but the basis of this, so back in 1956, there was a vicious terrorist attack on the Kfar Chabad, the Chabad village in Israel. And they murdered 6 students at their desks. The despair and the dejection pervaded the community, the village. And you know how that despair can start to eat away at the foundations of your belief and everything else. For a while, the Rebbe didn't respond because obviously the Rebbe was going through his own pain and anguish. But at some point, the Rebbe spoke out and he said, I strongly hope that with God's help, you will overcome all hindrances and you will strengthen private and public constructions, that you will expand all the institutes in quantity and quality, and you will intensify Torah study, our protection, and the mitzvahs fulfillment with joy. In other words, the Rebbe's response to terrorism is to add more light in the world. Do more Torah, do more mitzvahs. Do not succumb to the ugliness of terrorism, but rather take on more Torah and mitzvahs, add more light to the world. The terrorists tore down part of the village, build it up, twice the size, 3 times the size, 4 times the size. Add in quantity, add in quality, bring in more students. The way we fight the darkness of the exile is by bringing in more and more light. And that is our response every time. I remember I was living in Chicago at the time when there was the terrorist attack at Mumbai, on the Chabad house in Mumbai. It was horrific. Within the next week, we made a massive rally of Jews in the northern Chicago suburb area at a big meeting hall, and hundreds of people came, and we added in Torah and in tefillah and prayer, and everyone gave tzedakah. We took on mitzvahs. We took on a commitment to do another mitzvah in the schus, memory of those. But bottom line is we add more light. We add more light. And that is consistently the positivity bias message, is that we have to add more light. I don't know if you guys were familiar with this, but the idea of celebrating birthday parties was never a Jewish idea. It was never a Jewish thing. Birthday parties is definitely a big American thing, but it was never a Jewish idea, birthday parties. When the Rebbe's wife passed away, obviously he was in mourning. He stayed in his home. He had a minyan in his home. When he spoke publicly on a microphone from his home for that year, for that 11 months. On her birthday, what would have been her 87th birthday, the Rebbe said, here's a suggestion. It would be of great merit to my wife's passing soul that in connection with the ascent of her neshama, we should take on the following custom. Jews should begin to publicly celebrate their birthday. In previous generations, this was observed only in a private way, but we should do so publicly. And at each public gathering of a birthday, there should be Torah said out loud. Mitzvahs should be done together. And tzedakah should be given together. So have a birthday party and do Torah and tefillah and tzedakah at the birthday party to add more light in the world. So that every time there's a birthday, that becomes an excuse to have a party and add more light to the world. And the Rebbe even participated by sharing 12 different pasukim that would be unique pasukim to add to the parties, to say whenever there's a children's rally, birthday parties, or anytime there's a rally of children, we should say these 12 pasukim. And the pasukim are taken from Torah and the books of the prophets and the books of the writings and from Tanya, a little bit of a potpourri of all parts of Torah. And these 12 pasukim should be said whenever children get together, and how much more so when it's a special birthday party. In 1980, on the anniversary of the Rebbe's father's passing, the Rebbe took on the idea of, I remember this one. I remember this for bringing. The Rebbe said, there's this thing in the world about retiring. What's a thing like that? What is that? Does God ever retire? What kind of thing is retire? It's not a Jewish idea. You're either growing or you're dying. It's one or the other. So the Rebbe said we should establish when a couple gets married. So the first couple of years of their marriage, he goes to Kollel. He continues his Torah learning as they start to build their family. When a guy reaches retirement age, let him go back to Kollel. Let's start a Kollel Tiferes Levi Yitzchak. He took his father's name, Levi Yitzchak, and he established the idea that around the world, Chabad houses should establish a Kollel for retired people to come and learn Torah and do mitzvahs, and therefore in their retirement, you don't have an excuse anymore, right? You used to say, I got to go to work and I can't sit in Torah. Okay, now you're retired. You have time. You have time now, which of course, God bless you, all of you. You're here. This is this is our Tiferes Levi Yitzchak Kollel. But the idea then is not finding excuses for the challenges of life, but rather finding how can we add in Torah and mitzvahs given these circumstances.
So I beg to differ on the statement that you don't have excuse. It seems like everyone has some excuse.
One of my teachers in yeshiva, Rabbi Fitzi Lipsker, Olav Shalom, he said this 1,000 times. The best excuse still leaves you with mud on your face. Excuse say here now, you excuse say here. You're still not on time. Right?
Ask the Marines about an excuse.
No excuses. So the idea then is that even in losses which we deem as permanent losses, they're not permanent. Number one, it's only from this world, it's not from the next world, and the Neshama never is gone. It's never completely gone. And God willing, Mashiach will come. The B'tchias HaMeisim will all be reunited again. The resurrection of the dead will all be reunited again. And it's I've sometimes whether it's you pick up a book and you start getting into the book and it starts to get really scary and you start to get really nervous, right? I flip to the end. I want to know the hero survives. If I don't have that, I'm not reading the rest of the book. I'm not doing this. I will not torment myself, right? But if I know the hero survives, okay, fine, I can enjoy the book, right? So you flip to the end, right? We Jews, we already read the last chapter. Mashiach comes, and God is revealed like the oceans, the ocean floor underneath the oceans is revealed, right? And everything gets revealed, everybody gets it. Everybody apologizes to each other for all the misdeeds, and we go weiter. We go on with shalom across the world, peace across the world. We already have that end of the chapter book. Yisrael, and last week, remember, Yisrael was on his deathbed, and he wanted to share when Mashiach would come with his sons, and of course, he didn't get to. God made him forget that, so he couldn't share it, right? Because we're not supposed to know it. We're supposed to be continually yearning for it, right? But we know it comes. So we read the last chapter.
Where's the concept of reincarnation?
What is it?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Say the question again.
Oh, the question is, where's the concept of reincarnation come in? Is that a Jewish concept or not?
Yes, absolutely. The prophets talk about it all the time. Yes.
So then the question comes, when the Mashiach comes, what are you coming back at? Which of your lives? All of them, or?
Oh,
That's a good question.
so every candle can light more candles without any loss to itself.
Right.
And each of those candles can light candles. There are 600,000 neshamas klolius, general neshamas, general souls, amongst the Jewish people. Each of those have myriads below them, right? So your neshama will come back with each body that it has inhabited.
Yeah.
Each body will come back. But there are stages to this whole thing of Mashiach. The sages talk about there are stages to this whole thing. There's a stage of, darkest before the dawn, when it really looks bad and you can't even imagine the concept of Mashiach coming. Then there's this dawn, this era of Mashiach, when the world doesn't change, except the attitude towards Jews. When people understand, and they can, I give the example of people in a dark room bumping into each other and stepping on the furniture and tripping and getting hurt and screaming and yelling. Someone turns on the light, it all stops. All the frustration, all the anxiety, it's all gone. When God, so to speak, turns on the light, when people can see the godliness in the world, and they can see the godliness that's hidden in every single thing, then the negative behaviors automatically cease. That's the early stage of Mashiach. Then there's there's an ingathering of the people all home to the Holy Land, and the Beis Hamikdash gets rebuilt. Only then, when all the Jews are home and the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, only then do you know who Mashiach really was. In other words, until the job is done, we can consider that person Mashiach because he's doing the work. But you don't know for sure until the work is done. So any claims about someone being Mashiach up until now, by Jewish law, that's a fraud automatically. Because if we don't have everyone home in Israel and the Beis Hamikdash built, then you can't know that that's Mashiach. You have someone working towards it and building towards it, and it looks like it, and you can call that person. In every generation, someone should be doing the work of Mashiach. Rabbi Akiva called Bar Kochba Mashiach. Rabbi Akiva, the great sage, went behind Bar Kochba to hold his spears and carry his arrows and bows and arrows, because he considered him Mashiach. When Bar Kochba was killed, Akiva said, "Okay, well, that's not him. Go back to the drawing board." So
you know when it's not, but you don't know when it is.
Until it's over. When Mashiach comes and we have the Beis Hamikdash and everyone's home, and the halacha, the court of Jewish law, says there's becheskas Mashiach, we should consider someone Mashiach. He looks like it. He's doing the work. We should consider him. And then there's Vadai Mashiach. When it's all done, okay, now we know, give him the crown. Now you can give him the crown. But first, everyone's got to come home. I was talking with someone the other day. I don't know, you may have heard this, people say this before, but if a prophet 2,000 years ago, in his prophecy, he had a vivid visualization of Jews all climbing on board 757 Boeing jets and flying El Al straight home to Israel. How's he going to tell his neighbor? What languaging could he possibly use 2,000 years ago to describe what he just saw? So the prophets talk about.
It's nice knowing you, but we're scheduled to leave on angels.
It says the prophets have used the words that the Jews will come home on the wings of eagles. They'll come home on clouds of glory. I don't know. Maybe he saw 757, but he couldn't, I don't know. But I'd be comfortable in business class. I would be.
I believe there's a fighter jet that's called an Eagle. One of the modern.
Yeah.
Little cramped for that.
I have a question. In the time of Mashiach coming, there's stages of it. So if the first stage, if people's eyes are opened up and all the obstacles are no longer in our way, isn't it possible that because of that, we can achieve all our mitzvahs that we're supposed to? And if that's the case, that all our mitzvahs are achieved in our lifetime, that we have no purpose here anymore? Hashem claims us?
Mm-hmm.
So the very first part of the Code of Jewish Law says that at every day, at every moment, each one of us should see as if we are on a balance. And the very next deed that we do can tip the scale for the whole world. If we do an act of goodness and kindness, that could be the last straw that brings Mashiach, tips the scale, and we have the final revelation. So all of those things that we do, each step along the way, those are all things that we can add to the bringing of Mashiach and discuss the merit that we have of turning the tide.
But I'm saying, say